Welcome, weary traveler. You've left the noise of the world behind and stepped into a realm untouched by time. Here, candlelight dances upon ancient stone walls, and the air carries the soft hum of forgotten lullabies. Beyond these gates, the night is gentle, and every story is a silver thread, weaving warmth around your heart. So rest your mind. Let each word be a quiet step into the halls of dreams, until sleep, tender and deep, finds you. You are safe here, and the world drifts away. Chapter 1: The Whisper of Moonlight. Far beyond the bustling towns and cobbled roads of the kingdom, there stood a castle unlike any other. It was not grand because of its size, nor because of gold or jewels that decorated its halls. Instead, the castle of Eldoria was treasured because of its serenity. It sat upon a hill that overlooked green valleys, where gentle rivers wound like silver ribbons beneath the pale light of the moon. At night, when the world grew quiet and even the birds hushed their songs, the castle seemed to glow softly, as though the stones themselves held the memory of countless peaceful nights. The people of the surrounding village often called it the Moonlit Castle. They would tell stories to their children, how the castle was touched by the stars, how its walls never chilled in winter, and how anyone who walked through its gates would feel a calmness settle deep within their heart. It was a place not of battles or of courtly intrigue, but of rest, warmth, and quiet reflection. On this particular evening, the air was cool, brushed with the faintest scent of lavender that grew wild along the castle gardens. A slow wind wandered over the hills, carrying the lull of rustling leaves. Within the castle walls, torches burned low, not in defiance of the dark, but in harmony with it. Their warm glow painted the stone corridors with soft golden light, flickering gently against tapestries of faded blue and green. In a chamber not far from the western tower sat Sir Selim, a knight whose armor had long been set aside. He was known not for his victories in war, for Eldoria had known no war in many generations, but for his steady presence. His eyes, the color of deep oak wood, always seemed to linger as if they carried within them a secret patience. Tonight, as he sat by a crackling hearth, he traced the rim of his wooden cup, letting the warmth of chamomile tea flow gently into his hands. The fire burned softly, its embers sighing as they shifted, casting hues of amber across the chamber walls. Each pop of the wood seemed like the smallest heartbeat, filling the silence with a rhythm both steady and kind. Selim leaned back in his chair, the kind carved with simple vines along its frame, and let his thoughts drift, not to matters of duty, but to the ease of the moment itself. Beyond his window stretched the silver glow of the moon, full and bright. Its light poured across the valley, illuminating the river as though the earth itself had unfurled a mirror. The soft outline of the village could be seen nestled in the distance, rooftops and chimneys resting beneath the dark embrace of the forest. Smoke from the day's fires had faded, and now only the calm shimmer of lanterns glowed faintly in a handful of windows. The sight brought him a deep comfort. The village was sleeping peacefully, and with it, so too did his own heart feel at rest. He rose slowly, carrying his cup with both hands, and walked to the open balcony. The night air greeted him tenderly, brushing his face with coolness. From here, the castle garden below could be seen. Beds of roses, ivy trailing along stone arches, and the quiet fountain that murmured in the stillness. The sound of water trickling was delicate, like a whisper meant only for those who truly listened. Selim closed his eyes, letting the hush of night surround him. He thought of how many evenings had passed this way, how many more would follow, each one carrying the same softness, the same unhurried grace. In that moment, Time felt as though it had no meaning, only the steady rhythm of life, unfolding gently beneath the moon. Elsewhere within the castle, Lady Evelyn, the keeper of the library, moved carefully among the shelves of ancient tomes. She was not young, yet her presence carried an ageless gentleness, as though the wisdom of the books had become part of her very soul. Tonight, she held a candle in one hand, its flame dancing faintly as she sought a volume bound in velvet blue. Her footsteps were soft upon the stone floor, the air around her rich with the scent of parchment and cedar. The library itself was a place of silence so deep that even the faint scratch of her gown's hem against the ground felt like a song. Outside the tall, arched windows, the moonlight spilled through, resting upon the spines of books in shimmering stripes. Each one glistened faintly, as if reminding her of the knowledge held within. When at last she found the volume she sought, she carried it tenderly to the reading alcove by the great fireplace. The fire had been reduced to embers, yet its glow was enough to warm her as she opened the book. Her eyes followed the words slowly, not with urgency but with a quiet savoring, as though each sentence was a sip of something rich and soothing. She read not to know, but to rest, to allow her mind to wander softly through the landscapes of story. Occasionally, she paused, setting the book upon her lap, and let her gaze drift to the moonlit windows. The glow of night reminded her that beyond these walls, beyond the words of men, the world itself was the greatest book, its pages written in rivers, hills, and starlight. She smiled faintly, letting the thought settle over her like a blanket. The castle was full of such quiet lives. The kitchen fires had long since been reduced to glowing coals, the last loaves of bread cooling upon the wooden tables. The stable hands had finished tending the horses, the animals now resting on fresh hay, their soft breaths rising like clouds in the cool night. In the courtyard, the ivy along the stone walls swayed gently, touched by the same breeze that had brushed Selim's face upon the balcony. Everywhere within Eldoria, there was calm, not silence alone, but a symphony of hushed sounds, the crackle of fire, the trickle of water, the rustle of leaves, the breath of animals, and the soft beating of human hearts. Together, they formed the kind of music that was felt rather than heard, the music of peace itself. Sir Selim lingered still upon his balcony, his gaze wandering upward to the stars. Their soft shimmer reminded him of something he often felt but seldom spoke aloud, that the world, vast as it was, could be gentle too. Though time moved ceaselessly forward, the night sky never hurried, never demanded, simply was. At length, he returned inside, setting his empty cup upon the wooden table beside the hearth. He placed a hand upon the chair's arm, feeling the smoothness of the wood, polished not by craftsmen but by years of touch, of quiet evenings spent in reflection. Slowly, he lowered himself once more into the chair, leaning back as the fire's glow caressed his face. He let his eyes close, not with finality but with surrender to the calm. His breath deepened, steady and slow, mingling with the faint sighs of the fire. In that space between wakefulness and dreams, he thought of the castle itself, the way its stones seemed to hum with quiet strength, the way its halls embraced the night, the way the moon crowned it with silver light. Eldoria was not only a place of rest, it was rest itself, shaped into walls, gardens, and hearths. And so the night continued, unbroken, soft as a whispered lullaby. Within the castle, within the valley, within the hearts of all who dwelled there, peace remained. Chapter 2: Whispers of the Gardens. The morning after Sir Alaric first walked the halls of Eldoria felt like the quiet continuation of a dream. The air carried a gentle coolness, still heavy with dew that clung to the castle's gardens. Soft beams of sunlight spilled through the arched windows of his chamber, resting upon the polished wooden floor and scattering faint reflections upon the stone walls. Sir Alaric awoke slowly, stretching beneath a blanket woven from thick wool dyed in rich, earthen tones. His chamber was simple but inviting, furnished with a heavy oak bedstead, a small table with a flickering candle nearly melted away, and a hearth still glowing faintly from the embers of the night. The fire, though dim, exhaled a comforting warmth into the room, keeping away the morning chill. He lingered for a moment in bed, listening to the castle breathe. There were no hurried footsteps or clashing arms here, only the distant trickle of water from a fountain in the courtyard and the low cooing of doves roosting in the rafters outside his window. It was a stillness unlike any he had known, and in that stillness, he allowed himself to take a long, unhurried breath. At length, he rose, washed his face with the cool water set in a bronze basin, and dressed in his tunic of muted green and a cloak of soft wool. He wore no armor today. Eldoria felt like a place where steel was unnecessary, where peace itself stood guard. The castle gardens awaited him. Stepping into the courtyard, Alaric was greeted by a sweep of greenery glistening with dew. Gravel paths wound between hedges trimmed into gentle arcs, and roses climbed along trellises, their blossoms heavy with color. An ancient willow leaned toward the pond at the garden's heart, its long branches dipping to touch the water, where golden carp moved slowly beneath the surface. As he walked the path, the scents of lavender and rosemary lingered in the air, soothing in their natural sweetness. The castle gardeners, dressed in humble linen, moved quietly along the beds, clipping here, planting there, never in haste. Their faces, too, bore the serene contentment of people who lived in harmony with their land. "Good morning, Sir Knight," one of them greeted softly, inclining her head. Alaric returned the bow with equal warmth. "Good morning. Your gardens are wondrous, more peaceful than any cloister I've walked." The woman smiled faintly, her hands cradling a cluster of herbs. "Eldoria blooms under stillness. Each plant listens to the quiet, and so it thrives." Her words stayed with him as he wandered deeper, toward a shaded archway of ivy that led into the inner gardens. Here the air grew cooler, the sunlight softened by a lattice of leaves above. Birds sang gently in the branches, a chorus not meant to stir, but to lull. Every sound in Eldoria seemed crafted not for grandeur, but for rest. At a stone bench near the pond, Alaric settled, his eyes tracing the slow circles of the carp. The water mirrored the sky, soft blue streaked with drifting clouds, and he found himself falling into thought. He had journeyed across kingdoms, ridden through forests shadowed and vast, crossed fields scarred by wars. Yet here, in this castle, he felt none of the weariness that years of wandering had laid upon him. It was as though Eldoria breathed a balm upon his soul, smoothing the sharp edges of memory. As he sat in quiet reflection, a soft voice reached him. "You favor the gardens as I do." He turned to see Lady Evelyn approaching, robed in pale green with a shawl of gold thread draped lightly over her shoulders. Her steps upon the gravel were light, deliberate, as if she wished not to disturb the peace that lay over the place. "I do, my lady," Alaric replied, rising courteously. "The gardens here carry a calm I have seldom known." Evelyn smiled gently, her gaze sweeping toward the pond. "They are the heart of Eldoria. My mother believed that peace begins where flowers are nurtured. For how can one raise a blade when one has tended to blossoms in the morning?" The knight inclined his head, pondering her words. "A wisdom I would that more lords carried." Too often have I seen steel chosen over soil. Here, she said, seating herself upon the bench, soil and stone are our armor. Eldoria has stood 100 years without battle, not by strength of sword, but by gentleness of spirit. Those who come with anger find themselves softened, as though the air itself asks them to breathe slower. For a while they sat in silence together, the ripples on the pond and the whisper of leaves composing the music of their quiet companionship. When they rose again, Evelyn guided him to the outer edges of the garden where a small orchard bloomed. Apple trees, heavy with green and red, swayed in the gentle breeze. Beyond them, fields of barley shimmered softly, their golden tips swaying like waves in the sun. A stone path meandered to a gazebo entwined with flowering vines. Here Evelyn paused, resting her hand upon the carved wood. This place is where many of the castle folk come to read, to tell stories, or simply to sit. Would you sit with me a while, Sir Alaric, and let the morning pass in ease? The knight bowed slightly, lowering himself beside her upon the wooden seat. The air carried the fragrance of blossoms and the distant sweetness of ripening fruit. Evelyn spoke of small things, of how the seasons shaped the gardens, of how the moonlight painted the towers silver at night, of the quiet festivals where songs were sung not for revelry, but for remembrance. Her voice was like a lullaby, steady and low, and Alaric found himself sinking into its cadence. She asked little of him, demanding no tales of his travels, as though she knew instinctively that silence was its own kind of balm. At last she said softly, "Every soul who comes to Eldoria carries a weight, though often they do not speak it. Yet here those weights seem lighter. I think perhaps the castle keeps them for us, and in return we need only breathe." Alaric looked around. The still pond, the orchard swaying gently, the golden light spread upon the grass, and he felt the truth in her words. His heart, once guarded, now felt unburdened, as though the stillness itself held it in gentle hands. As the day wore on, Alaric remained within the gardens long after Evelyn had returned to her duties. He traced the paths slowly, pausing often to feel the cool stone of the walls, or to breathe in the fragrance of the herbs, or to listen to the wings of a dove as it took flight. The sun climbed steadily overhead, and shadows shifted across the lawns. The gentle rhythm of time passed without urgency. He rested beneath the willow tree, its branches swaying like a curtain of green, the sound of water lapping at its roots lulling him into a brief, tranquil slumber. When he awoke, the sun was lower, gilding the garden in soft amber. The gardeners had gone, their work complete, leaving behind an orchard still humming with bees and a courtyard glowing with evening calm. Alaric rose, his body refreshed, his spirit at ease. The day had slipped by without him marking the hours, and he felt as though the garden itself had drawn him into its timeless stillness. That evening, he returned to the great hall. The hearths were lit, casting flickering warmth upon the stone walls, and the long tables were set for supper. The people of Eldoria gathered not with clamor but with quiet cheer, their voices soft, their laughter gentle. Evelyn was there, seated at the high table, and she greeted him with a nod. Alaric sat among the company, breaking bread, sipping warm broth, and listening to the soft murmur of stories shared. The meal stretched unhurried into the night, until candles burned low and only the fire's glow remained. When Alaric finally returned to his chamber, he lay beneath the woolen blankets with the scent of rosemary still clinging faintly to his cloak. He thought of the gardens, the pond, the willow, the quiet companionship of Evelyn's words. His heart slowed, his breath deepened, and soon he drifted into a sleep as deep and calm as the waters beneath the willow tree. Chapter 3: The Garden Beneath the Stars. The Castle of Eldoria, with its moonlit towers and gentle halls, stood as a monument not only to stone and time, but also to the quiet beauty of living things. Though the walls had stood for centuries, weathering storms and whispers of ages past, its gardens remained ever new, ever fresh, ever alive. It was in these gardens, beneath the velvet hush of twilight, that Ser Selim found himself wandering one evening, his heart lighter than it had been in many days. The sky was clear, painted in delicate shades of blue and silver, and already a handful of stars had begun their nightly vigil. Their light shimmered softly across the tops of the hedges, the fountains, and the pathways of white stone that wound their way like ribbons through the greenery. The castle garden stretched wide, a serene maze of flowers, tall cypress trees, and quiet alcoves where benches invited weary travelers to rest. Ser Selim stepped carefully, his boots whispering against the stone path, and he inhaled deeply of the night air. It carried with it the mingled scents of lavender and jasmine, roses and thyme. Somewhere close by, water fell in a trickling rhythm from a carved fountain, its song blending with the evening breeze. He paused near the fountain and let his gaze linger on its design. The basin was wide and shallow, filled with crystal-clear water that reflected the stars as if the heavens themselves had descended into its surface. At the fountain's center rose the statue of a maiden carved from pale stone, her arms outstretched, holding a bowl from which water flowed in a gentle stream. The liquid sparkled in the moonlight, each drop like a falling jewel. Ser Selim sat upon the fountain's edge, allowing himself to simply exist in the quiet moment. His armor had been left behind in his chamber, and he wore only a soft tunic and cloak. Without the weight of steel pressing against him, he felt as though he could breathe more freely, as though the air itself had a calming hand upon his shoulders. For some time, he remained still, simply listening. The breeze moved gently among the trees, carrying a low rustle of leaves. From somewhere deep in the garden came the faint song of a nightingale, sweet and pure, threading its melody through the air like a ribbon of sound. It seemed the garden was alive with voices, each subtle, each gentle, yet all together forming a chorus of peace. At length, Lady Evelyn appeared from one of the side paths, her gown flowing softly as she walked. She carried a small lantern, though its flame was unnecessary beneath the radiant moon. The light danced across her features, illuminating her calm smile. "You favor the gardens tonight, Ser Selim," she said, her voice as gentle as the air itself. He rose slightly and inclined his head. "I find them comforting, my lady. It is as though the world has set aside its burdens here, leaving only stillness." Evelyn's smile deepened, and she came to sit at the fountain's edge beside him. "That is the gift of Eldoria's garden. My ancestors tended it with devotion, not merely for its beauty, but for the peace it offers to the soul. When the heart is restless, the garden knows how to soothe it." Together, they sat in silence for a time. The stars above brightened with each passing minute, and their reflection upon the water grew ever more enchanting. Evelyn set her lantern down upon the stone and folded her hands neatly in her lap, her gaze lifted toward the heavens. "Do you see that cluster of stars there?" she asked softly, pointing to the east where a small group of stars twinkled brightly, close together. Selim followed her gesture. "I do. That is known as the Crown of Eldoria," Evelyn explained. "It is said that long ago, when the kingdom was first founded, the stars themselves blessed the land with a crown of light. The old tales speak of a promise, that so long as those stars shine in the sky, peace will dwell within these walls." Selim considered her words, watching the stars with quiet reverence. "A beautiful promise," he murmured. "Yes," she said. and one I often think of when I walk here at night. For even when the world beyond our gates is restless, I believe the heavens whisper reassurance. The silence that followed was not empty but full of the scents of flowers, the sounds of the night, and the warmth of a shared presence. The garden wrapped around them like a cloak of serenity, and every breath seemed to deepen the peace. After some time, Evelyn rose and motioned for Selim to follow. Come, I want to show you another part of the garden, one that few visit at night. He stood, curious, and followed her along a narrow stone path lined with roses that climbed upon trellises. The blossoms, though closed for the night, released a fragrance that lingered sweet upon the air. Fireflies drifted lazily between the leaves, their tiny lights flickering like sparks from some unseen hearth. The path curved gently until it led them into a secluded alcove, half hidden by tall hedges. In the center of the space stood an ancient oak, its branches vast and strong, spreading wide like arms that had embraced centuries. Beneath the oak was a simple wooden bench, weathered but sturdy, and Evelyn seated herself upon it with ease. "This oak," she said softly, her hand brushing its trunk, "is older than the castle itself. Some say it was planted when the first stone of Eldoria was laid, and that it has watched over every generation since." Selim lowered himself to the bench beside her, running his gaze up the towering branches. "It feels alive in more than the usual way, as though it remembers." Evelyn nodded, her eyes thoughtful. "I like to believe it does. Whenever I am uncertain or troubled, I sit beneath it and listen. And somehow, in its silence, I always find answers." They both fell quiet again, listening, not only to the rustle of the leaves but to the stillness that lay beyond. Time seemed to stretch gently, like a lullaby without end, and Selim found himself sinking deeper into calm. The night deepened, and the moon climbed higher, spilling silver light across the garden. Shadows grew softer, blending seamlessly with the glow, and the whole world seemed wrapped in a gentle balance of dark and light. Evelyn leaned back against the oak, her expression serene, and closed her eyes. "Sometimes," she whispered, "I imagine that this place exists not in time but in eternity, that nights like these will never fade, and we can always return to them whenever we wish." Selim looked at her, then back to the stars. "Perhaps that is true. Perhaps moments such as these live forever in the heart, untouched by the turning of the world." They lingered long in that hidden alcove, letting the garden speak its silent language of peace. When at last Evelyn rose to return, the path seemed even more tranquil than before, as though the oak itself had granted them a blessing. Side by side, they walked slowly back toward the castle, the night around them quiet, endless, and kind. And as Selim glanced once more at the sky, he saw the crown of Eldoria shining brightly above, a promise carried on starlight, a promise that whispered of peace everlasting. Chapter 4: The Hall of Whispers. The night in Eldoria often felt like a living thing. Its silence thick yet tender, its shadows woven with secrets, its moonlight a silken veil draped across stone and leaf. By the time Ser Selim returned from the gardens, the castle itself seemed to breathe more deeply, as though it too had settled into slumber. Yet some places within those walls never slept. Among them was the Hall of Whispers, a chamber unlike any other. Few spoke of it openly, and fewer still visited it at night. But Selim, restless in his spirit despite the peace he had found in the garden, felt his steps turning toward it as though drawn by an unseen hand. The hall lay at the heart of the eastern wing, past long corridors lined with faded portraits of kings and queens. Their painted eyes followed him as he passed, solemn and knowing, as though they themselves waited for him to see what the hall would show. His boots made no sound on the worn stone floors. Even the air seemed to hush in reverence. When at last he reached the tall double doors of carved oak, Selim paused. The carvings upon them were intricate, spirals and circles that seemed to shift in the flickering torchlight, as though alive. At the center of each door was a symbol, an open eye. He placed his hand upon the wood, cold, solid, yet strangely expectant. With a steady breath, he pushed the doors open. The hall greeted him not with grandeur but with mystery. It was vast, with ceilings lost in shadow. Pillars lined the sides, their surfaces covered in carvings so old they were softened by time. Between them hung heavy drapes of deep indigo, embroidered with silver threads that glimmered faintly in the dim light. Candles burned here and there in wrought iron holders, their flames trembling as though stirred by an unseen breath. But the most striking thing was the echo. Every step Selim took was met with a soft murmur, as though the stone itself repeated his movements in whispers. It was not the hollow echo of an empty chamber. It was layered, textured, filled with something more than sound. He stopped, listening, and then he heard it. Words, not clear, not loud, but threads of voices woven into the silence. Some were faint as sighs, others sharper, like fragments of speech caught on the wind. He could not make out their meaning, but they seemed to come from all around him, rising from the stone floor, seeping from the carved pillars, drifting from the indigo drapes. "The past speaks," he murmured to himself, and indeed so it was said. The Hall of Whispers was built when Eldoria was young, designed as a place where memory itself lingered. Within its stones lay echoes of all who had walked there before. Kings, queens, knights, poets, and dreamers. Their words, their laughter, their sorrow had seeped into the hall, and here they remained, forever whispering. Selim moved deeper into the chamber. The flicker of candles guided him toward the center, where a round mosaic stretched across the floor. It was made of countless tiles, each the size of a coin, arranged into the shape of a great tree. Its roots reached outward across the circle, its branches spread wide, and its trunk stood tall and firm. Kneeling, he brushed his fingers across the cool tiles. The tree glimmered faintly in the candlelight, alive with subtle colors of jade, pearl, and onyx. "Every life is a branch," came a voice behind him. Startled, Selim rose and turned. Lady Evelyn stood at the edge of the mosaic, a lantern in her hand. Its glow lit her face softly, catching the curve of her cheek, the steady calm of her eyes. She stepped closer, her gown trailing quietly across the stone. "You know this place?" Selim asked. "I do," she said, her voice hushed as though speaking in a sanctuary. "My father brought me here when I was a child. He told me that every word spoken in this hall remains, carried in whispers, so that the future may never forget the past." Her gaze lowered to the mosaic. "This tree is called the Eternal Oak. Each tile is said to hold a memory of someone who once lived within Eldoria's walls. To walk upon it is to walk upon the lives of those who came before us." Selim bowed his head slightly, feeling the weight of her words. "And do you believe it, my lady, that these whispers are truly the voices of the past?" Evelyn's eyes lingered on the shimmering branches. "I do not only believe it," she whispered. "I have heard them." The air seemed to thicken, the whispers rising faintly as though stirred by her confession. Selim strained to listen, and for a fleeting moment he thought he caught a word. A name, perhaps, but it slipped away before he could hold it. Evelyn stepped onto the mosaic, her lantern casting long shadows across the branches. She tilted her head as though listening to something beyond Selim's hearing. A soft smile touched her lips. "They are gentle tonight," she said. "Sometimes their voices are restless, as though warning of storms, but tonight they speak in calm." Selim watched her, struck by how she seemed part of the hall itself, her presence blending seamlessly with its hush, its mystery, its timelessness. He took a step closer. "What do they say to you, my lady?" She turned her gaze to him, thoughtful. "They remind me that we are never alone, that the weight we carry is shared by those who walked before us, and that their strength remains with us still." Her words lingered in the air like a blessing. For a long while, they stood in silence, letting the whispers wash over them. The hall seemed to pulse softly, alive with memory, its stone walls breathing with voices unseen. It was as though the castle itself had opened its heart, revealing to them a secret truth, that history was not gone but living, flowing like a river through time. At last, Evelyn turned toward the far end of the hall, where a great tapestry hung. Its fabric was old, its edges frayed, yet its colors still glowed faintly in the candlelight. She beckoned Selim to follow. Together they approached. The tapestry depicted a vast night sky filled with stars, and beneath it, the outline of Eldoria's castle rising proud and strong. Above the tallest tower gleamed a constellation, the very same crown of Eldoria they had seen in the garden. Evelyn touched the fabric gently. "This was woven when the castle was first built. It has hung here ever since, bearing witness to every king and queen who has ruled." Selim studied the stars stitched in silver thread, their pattern precise and enduring. "The crown again," he murmured. "It seems the heavens follow you everywhere in this place." "Perhaps they follow us all," Evelyn said softly. "Perhaps they are watching, waiting, reminding us that our lives, too, are threads in this tapestry." Selim let his gaze linger upon the stars. He thought of the whispers filling the hall, of the tree beneath their feet, of the garden's oak, and now this woven sky. All spoke of memory, of time that did not end but flowed ever onward, carrying each soul within it. And for the first time in many years, he felt not burden but comfort in the weight of the past. Evelyn lowered her lantern, and together they began to walk back through the hall. The whispers followed them, softer now, fading into sighs. Yet even as they left, Selim knew he would carry them within him, the voices of countless souls, reminding him that he was part of something larger, something endless. At the doors, Evelyn paused. "Do you feel it, Ser Selim? The hall does not merely echo, it listens. It holds us, as though promising that we will not be forgotten." Selim met her gaze, steady and true. "I feel it, my lady, and it is a promise I will keep within my own heart." The doors closed behind them, the whispers sealed once more within the chamber. But the silence that followed was not emptiness. It was full, rich, alive. The Hall of Whispers had spoken, and its memory remained. Together, they walked into the moonlit corridors of Eldoria, carrying with them the gentle truth that time, like the whispers, would never let them go. Chapter 5, The Eternal Calm. The dawn that greeted Eldoria on this particular morning carried with it a sense of timeless stillness, as though the kingdom itself had decided to hold its breath in reverence. The gentle rays of sunlight spilled over the rolling hills, kissed the winding rivers, and lingered lovingly upon the ancient stones of the Moonlit Castle. Its high towers shimmered in hues of gold and silver, and the morning mist clung softly around its base like a silken shawl. There was no hurry in the air, no shadow of unrest. The world itself seemed to hum with quiet contentment, as though every leaf, every stone, every drifting cloud had aligned in harmony. The birds sang in the orchards beyond the walls, their notes lilting and soft, as if they too understood that this morning was not meant for grandeur, but for stillness. Within the castle walls, life stirred with unhurried grace. Servants moved quietly through the halls, their footsteps muffled on polished stone floors, while the faint sounds of water being drawn from wells and bread being baked in warm hearths drifted gently on the air. The kitchen smelled of honey and butter, mingling with the smoke of fresh firewood. In the courtyard, a stable hand brushed down a dappled horse, his movements slow and steady, and the animal leaned into the rhythm of the strokes as if lulled into a waking dream. It was a world untroubled, a realm held safely in the embrace of peace. Sir Selim awoke to the sound of the doves cooing outside his chamber window. The night stirred slowly, savoring the soft weight of the blankets and the warmth of the chamber. His bed was placed against a tall, arched window, and the golden morning light streamed across the floor, warming the stones beneath his feet. For a long moment, he simply remained still, letting the silence fold itself around him like a cloak. When he finally rose, there was no haste in his movement. He walked barefoot across the floor and rested both hands upon the stone sill of the window. His gaze wandered over the lush fields stretching endlessly toward the horizon. He could see shepherds guiding their flocks across the slopes, their movements unhurried, their voices carrying faintly on the morning breeze. The river glimmered like a silver thread winding its way through the valley, and beyond it, the forest swayed with the language of leaves. There was no need to prepare for battle, nor any summons to rush to a distant land. The kingdom was whole, serene, and safe. His journey, the quiet, inward one he had walked so patiently, was reaching its gentle conclusion. And yet, there was no sense of ending. Rather, it felt like an endless unfolding, a circle of peace that had no edges. Later that morning, Sir Selim walked through the castle gardens. The roses were in bloom, their petals opening wide to drink the dew, while lavender swayed softly in the breeze. The air carried the sweetness of jasmine, mingled with the earthy scent of fresh rain still clinging to the grass. He paused by the edge of the reflecting pool, where lily pads floated like green coins and dragonflies skimmed the surface in arcs of shining blue. He lingered there, watching ripples spread outward from a single drop that had fallen from a leaf. The movement was so small, so delicate, and yet the water accepted it fully, expanding the circle until it touched every edge of the pool. Selim thought, then, of how peace worked in the same way, how a quiet heart could send out ripples that touched lives far beyond its own. A young gardener was tending to a patch of tulips nearby, the boy humming a soft, wordless tune as he worked. The knight smiled at the sound, his heart light. Every note of that quiet song seemed to rise into the sky like incense, blending with the hum of bees and the sigh of wind through branches. Every sound, every fragrance, every detail of the garden carried a message of life's simple joy. It was here, among the blossoms and under the wide morning sky, that Sir Selim felt the fullness of what his journey had brought him. Not a treasure of gold, not glory etched into history, but the deeper wealth of inner stillness. As the day drew on, the knight wandered beyond the gardens into the village below the castle. The cobblestone streets were alive with gentle activity. Bakers placing warm loaves on wooden trays, children skipping along with baskets of apples, weavers hanging dyed cloth to dry in the sun. A mill will turned lazily in the river, creaking softly as it had for centuries. Everywhere Selim walked, he was greeted not with fanfare, but with smiles. A grandmother at her doorstep offered him a pear from her basket. A group of children waved from the shade of a tree, laughing as their small dog tumbled after them. A young mother cradled her infant, rocking slowly on a wooden bench, her eyes soft with contentment. The knight felt no need to speak much. His presence among them was enough, and theirs was enough for him. It was a communion of quiet lives, woven together in the tapestry of peace. That evening, the castle's great hall was aglow with lantern light. The nobles, villagers, and travelers had gathered once more, not for feasting or grandeur, but for something far simpler and sweeter. Long wooden tables held bowls of fruit, fresh bread, and cheese. There was laughter, but even that laughter was subdued, softened by the weight of the moment. Musicians strummed lutes with delicate fingers, filling the air with melodies as soft as falling leaves. The notes drifted upward, echoing against the high arches of the ceiling like whispers. Children played quietly near the hearth, their laughter a gentle reminder of innocence preserved. Sir Selim sat among them, not as a knight in shining armor, but simply as a man among friends. He listened as an elder told a story of the kingdom's early days, of rivers carved by patient time and stars that had always watched over Eldoria. The elder's voice was slow, measured, like the rhythm of waves on a shore. As the tale wove its way into the listeners' hearts, Selim's gaze lifted to the high windows, where the night had deepened. The moon was rising round, full, and impossibly luminous. Its silver glow spilled across the castle walls, wrapping them in warmth as though the heavens themselves had leaned down to embrace the kingdom. And in that moment, Selim understood. His silent journey was not about reaching some distant place or achieving some distant dream. It was about learning to stand still within the calm of the present, to open his heart to the gentle rhythms of life. When the hall grew quiet and the guests drifted to their chambers, Sir Selim walked one last time along the castle's outer wall. The wind was soft against his cheek, carrying with it the smell of earth, stone, and night-blooming flowers. He placed a hand upon the cool stone and closed his eyes. The kingdom of Eldoria breathed peacefully around him. The rivers whispered in the dark, the trees murmured their endless lullaby, and the stars blinked kindly overhead. He could hear the faint laughter of villagers below, fading as lanterns were dimmed one by one, until the entire land seemed to exhale in unison. The silent night, once burdened by duty and longing, now found himself lighter than he had ever been. For silence, he realized, was never empty. It was filled with the quiet pulse of life, the steady beat of a kingdom at rest, the hushed songs of those who lived in harmony, the eternal calm of the moonlit castle. And so, with the night wrapping gently around him, Sir Selim allowed himself to rest. He leaned against the stone wall, gazed one last time at the glowing moon, and whispered a vow only the stars could hear, that he would carry this peace within him always, wherever his path might yet lead. The castle's lanterns flickered softly in the distance. The breeze carried its gentle hymn, and Eldoria settled into a sleep as deep and timeless as the sea. The silent night's journey was complete, not in triumph or fanfare, but in peace, pure, endless peace. Chapter 6. The Whispering Stars. The night that followed in Eldoria seemed to stretch endlessly, not in weariness, but in quiet wonder. The moonlit castle stood like a guardian of dreams, its tall towers gleaming faintly beneath the round, glowing moon. The air was cool, touched with the faint perfume of night-blooming jasmine that trailed along the castle walls. The kingdom lay wrapped in silence, a silence that was not empty but filled with life. The chirping of crickets, the gentle splash of a river stone disturbed by flowing waters, the whisper of the wind through tall grass. Sir Selim lingered at his chamber window, unable to pull himself away from the beauty of the sky. The stars shimmered brightly tonight, as though the heavens had gathered in celebration of the stillness below. Each star looked alive, twinkling with a voice of its own, though softer than any words men could speak. He rested his arms on the stone ledge and breathed slowly, allowing the rhythm of night to settle into him. It was not a time for thought or memory, not even for hope of what might come. It was a time simply to be. Somewhere far below, the castle gardens glowed faintly in the silver light. The roses had closed their petals for sleep, yet their fragrance remained in the air, sweet and grounding. A lantern swayed lightly along one of the pathways where a guard passed, but even the night steps carried no weight of vigilance. The peace of Eldoria had grown so deep that those who watched over it did so in ease, their swords resting lightly at their sides, their hearts free of burden. Selim turned away at last, leaving the window, and lay upon his bed. The chamber was large, its vaulted ceiling lost in shadows, yet it felt close and warm. A small fire flickered low in the hearth, throwing out a soft golden glow that swam lazily along the stone walls. The blankets were heavy and comforting, carrying the scent of lavender sewn into them by the castle maids. He closed his eyes, but sleep did not claim him at once. Instead, he drifted through the thin veil of wakefulness, listening to the world breathe outside. Each sound was a lullaby: the wind, the water, the faint call of a distant owl. When he finally slept, his dreams were no different from the waking peace. He walked along long corridors where sunlight fell in warm stripes across polished floors. He wandered through endless fields, the wheat brushing against his fingertips. He dreamed of the stars leaning closer, whispering soft secrets in a language not meant to be understood, but only felt. And when he awoke, it was still night, the fire having burned low, the moon still shining, steady and full. The next morning came as gently as the last. A mist curled along the hills, the light of dawn painting the landscape in strokes of rose and silver. The people of Eldoria rose slowly with it, bakers lifting bread from their ovens, shepherds walking their sheep toward green slopes, mothers humming while they drew water from the wells. There was no rush, no pressing task. Even work itself felt like an extension of rest, a steady rhythm that blended with the song of the land. Sir Selim left his chamber with calm steps, his sword not at his side but left behind, resting quietly against the wall where it had stood untouched for weeks. He had no need of it here, not anymore. His journey had given him peace, and the kingdom reflected it back to him with every sound and sight. He passed through the halls, greeting servants and friends alike with a nod and a soft word. In the great hall, the morning meal was being shared. Long wooden tables had been laid with bowls of porridge sweetened with honey, bread still warm, and jugs of fresh milk. Children chattered quietly, though their voices never broke the harmony of the place. Nobles and villagers alike sat side by side, their differences forgotten in the warmth of community. Selim sat among them, taking only a little, savoring the sweetness of the honey, the softness of the bread. Around him, laughter rose softly, like wind chimes stirred by a tender breeze. He found himself smiling, not with pride or with longing, but with a fullness of heart that needed nothing more. After the meal, he wandered once again to the castle gardens. Morning light dripped across the roses, turning each drop of dew into a pearl. The lavender swayed, the tulips stretched higher, and the air was thick with freshness. He paused near the fountain at the garden's heart, where clear water spilled in endless arcs into a shallow pool. Sitting upon its edge, he let his hand trail through the cool water, watching ripples spread outward in circles. Each ripple seemed like time itself, moving, soft, unhurried. A young girl approached, carrying a basket of apples she had gathered. She looked up at him with shy curiosity, and he smiled, motioning for her to sit beside him. They shared an apple in silence, the sound of the fountain filling the space between them. There was no need for words. Even the simplest act of sitting together, tasting the crisp sweetness of fruit, carried with it a richness that spoke more deeply than conversation. As day gave way to evening once again, the castle prepared for another quiet gathering. Not a feast, not a celebration, simply the joy of being together. Lanterns were hung across the courtyard, their light mingling with the slow rise of the moon. Musicians tuned their instruments, and once again the halls filled with soft melodies. This night, Sir Selim did not sit in the crowd, but wandered slowly along the periphery, watching the faces lit by firelight and lantern glow. He saw children curled up against their mothers, drifting to sleep with heads pillowed on warm laps. He saw elders speaking gently to younger folk, passing down wisdom not as command, but as gift. He saw travelers who had once carried weariness in their steps now leaning back with ease, their burdens lifted by the kingdom's embrace. Eventually, he stepped out into the night air again, walking alone toward the outer wall. The stars were brighter tonight, scattered like countless candles across a velvet sky. The moon had risen high, steady and luminous, as though it too watched over the kingdom with quiet devotion. Selim leaned upon the stone wall, his gaze lifted upward, his breath slow and steady. And as he stood there, he felt it once more, the truth of his journey. The silence he carried was not absence. It was presence. A presence that filled every shadow, every breeze, every heartbeat. A presence that told him he was home. The stars whispered again, their voices silent but deeply felt. They spoke not of destiny, not of battles, not of victories. They spoke of rest, of cycles that continued endlessly, of peace that needed no reason. And Selim, the silent night, closed his eyes and let their whispers sink into his soul. By midnight, the kingdom had gone still. The lanterns dimmed, the music faded, and the castle walls glowed softly beneath the moon. Sir Selim returned to his chamber, laying once more upon his bed. The fire had been tended. It glowed warmly, its embers shifting like stars fallen to earth. He pulled the lavender-scented blanket around his shoulders, his breathing slow, his heart at ease. And before sleep claimed him, he spoke aloud into the quiet. May this peace last forever. May it rest in every stone of this castle, in every leaf of the garden, in every heart that walks these halls. The words lingered in the still air, not as hope, but as truth already present. Then, with the soft sounds of the kingdom breathing around him, Sir Selim drifted into sleep. The stars outside blinked gently, the moon held steady, and Eldoria slept, not in silence that was empty, but in silence that was whole. The journey of the silent night had long since ended. Yet in the eternal calm of Eldoria, it continued, not in footsteps taken, but in breaths shared. And so the night deepened, carrying its hush over every roof and river, every field and flower, until the kingdom was cradled once more in the endless peace of the whispering stars. Chapter 7, The Whispering Woods. The morning in Eldoria began not with clamor or urgency, but with the softest unfolding of light. Beyond the moonlit castle's walls, the first rays of dawn stretched across the valley, brushing the treetops of the distant woods with a golden sheen. Mist lingered low upon the ground, drifting lazily between the roots of tall oaks and ancient elms. The kingdom breathed with an air of unbroken serenity, as though the very earth had chosen to remain in harmony with itself. Sir Selim awoke with this quiet beauty pressing gently upon his spirit. He lingered longer than usual in his chamber, sitting beside the window as he allowed the sunlight to spill across his face. The birds outside had begun their morning songs, some sweet and high, others low and steady, each voice adding to a tapestry of gentle sound that made the air feel alive. There was no need for haste. His armor remained untouched in the corner, resting as peacefully as he was. The knight's heart had grown accustomed to this rhythm of stillness, and he found himself savoring it with every passing day. After breaking his fast with bread still warm from the ovens and honey stirred into fresh cream, Selim wandered into the outer courtyard. From there, a narrow stone path wound its way toward the woods just beyond the castle fields. The trees had called to him for many days now, their silhouettes reaching across the horizon like quiet guardians. This morning, with the sun glowing pale and tender in the sky, he felt the gentle invitation most strongly. He set off without escort, carrying no sword at his side, only his cloak draped lightly over his shoulders. The path was soft with fallen leaves, their colors still vibrant despite the turning of the season. The further he walked, the quieter the world became. Not empty silence, but a deeper calm filled with the subtle murmurings of nature. Each step upon the soil seemed to sink him more fully into the embrace of the woods. The forest of Eldoria was no ordinary grove. To many, it was spoken of as the Whispering Woods, for those who walked among its trees often swore they heard voices. Gentle, soothing, never threatening. They said it was the breath of the trees themselves, old as the kingdom, humming lullabies to those who lingered within. As Selim entered, he felt it immediately. A sound soft and steady, as though the leaves themselves whispered with the passing breeze. The air carried a fragrance unlike any he had known before. A mingling of pine and fresh rain, of blossoms hidden deep among the roots. Shafts of sunlight broke through the canopy in slender beams, casting pools of golden light upon the mossy earth. The scene was so tranquil that it felt as though time itself slowed to match the pace of his steps. He paused by a small brook that threaded its way through the forest, its waters so clear that the smooth stones beneath sparkled as if lit from within. Kneeling, Selim dipped his hand into the stream. The water was cool, soothing, a perfect mirror to the calm that settled in his heart. He lingered there, watching as tiny fish darted in and out of the current, untroubled, their movements a dance as simple as it was eternal. A gentle breeze drifted through, carrying with it the faintest suggestion of song. It was not a melody played by human hands, nor sung by lips, but something woven into the very breath of the woods. The knight closed his eyes, and in that moment he thought he could almost hear words, soft, unformed, like a lullaby meant not for the ear but for the soul. Further along the path, he found a clearing where the grass grew thick and soft, like a natural carpet. In its center stood a great oak, its trunk wide enough to hold the stories of centuries within its bark. Selim approached it slowly, as though nearing an old friend. He placed his hand upon the rough wood, and the world seemed to quiet itself further still. The knight leaned against the oak and allowed his body to rest. The warmth of the sun filtered through the leaves above, scattering patterns of gold and shadow across his cloak. He listened to the steady hum of the forest, the birds in their nests, the rustle of rabbits in the underbrush, the brook still singing its watery hymn behind him. There was no urgency to rise, no summons to move forward. Only this moment, endless and unbroken, as though the world had folded itself into a single eternal breath. He thought of his life before, the restless travels, the weight of expectation, the battles fought not only with steel but with longing. Now, as the oak supported him, Selim realized how unnecessary such turmoil had been. Peace, he understood, was never something to chase. It was already here, already present in the whisper of leaves and the softness of the earth beneath his hands. As the day drew on, the light in the forest shifted into a gentler hue. Afternoon stretched toward evening, and the beams of sunlight grew warmer, tinged with amber. Selim rose slowly, as though waking from a dream, and wandered deeper until he reached the forest's edge. There, the trees opened into a small meadow, where wildflowers bloomed in shades of blue and violet, their petals turning toward the fading light. In the center of the meadow, a wooden bench had been placed long ago, its edges worn smooth by time. He sat upon it, his gaze lifting toward the sky as the first stars began to appear. The horizon glowed with a pale pink, and the crescent moon peaked above the treetops. The forest around him hummed with evening life, crickets beginning their songs, owls preparing their soft calls, and the steady rhythm of the brook continuing on. The knight folded his hands and breathed deeply, allowing the stillness to wash over him. The meadow, the woods, the distant castle glowing faintly in the twilight. All of it felt like part of the same eternal calm. He closed his eyes, and in that moment, the woods seemed to lean closer, whispering one final truth: that peace was not fleeting, not fragile, but eternal when held within the heart. When at last the stars deepened and the moonlight painted the meadow silver, Sir Selim rose. Slowly, unhurriedly, he walked back along the forest path. The brook sang him a farewell, the branches rustled softly above, and the great oak stood silent and steadfast, as though watching him depart. By the time he reached the castle walls, the lanterns had been lit, their glow flickering gently in welcome. The moonlit castle rose before him, serene as always, its stones kissed by starlight. The knight paused once more, gazing back at the woods. He smiled faintly, knowing that the whispers would remain with him, carried not only in memory but in the very rhythm of his breath. And as he stepped back into the warmth of the castle halls, Selim felt lighter than ever before. The woods had given him not a secret, nor a treasure, but something far more enduring. The reminder that the world's calm was eternal, waiting always in the hush of leaves and the glow of moonlight. Chapter 8: The Silent Lake. The morning returned with a softness that felt almost unreal, as if the very air carried the remnants of a dream. Beyond the walls of the moonlit castle, the valley stretched wide beneath the awakening sky. A pale silver mist lingered upon the fields, curling gently as though reluctant to leave. Above it, the first rays of sunlight unfolded with quiet grace, bathing the land in a glow that was neither harsh nor hurried. Sir Selim rose before the day fully broke, stirred by an unspoken invitation that seemed to beckon him beyond the castle grounds once more. He dressed simply, leaving behind armor and weapons, for he knew well by now that peace required no shield. Draping his cloak lightly across his shoulders, he descended the stone steps of the courtyard and made his way toward the far side of Eldoria's fields, where a hidden path led to the kingdom's quiet jewel, the Silent Lake. The path wound gently, bordered by wildflowers bending beneath the morning dew. Each petal seemed to hold a drop of the sky, trembling yet radiant. Birds darted between branches above, their wings catching the newborn light as though stitched from threads of gold. Selim walked slowly, unhurried, his boots pressing softly into the damp earth. Every step seemed to draw him deeper into a rhythm both ancient and eternal, the rhythm of the world itself breathing in harmony with him. As the path curved, the trees parted, and before him lay the Silent Lake. Its surface stretched wide and still, a mirror so perfect that the sky above seemed to have folded into it. The mist drifted lazily across the water, blurring the line between earth and heaven until it felt as though Selim stood on the edge of a dream. He paused at the shore, his breath catching, not in awe that struck like thunder, but in a gentler wonder that seeped slowly into the soul. The lake was utterly still. Not a ripple disturbed its surface. Even the breeze seemed to quiet itself in reverence. It was this stillness that had given the lake its name, for here silence was not absence but presence, a fullness that needed no sound. Selim stepped closer to the water, kneeling upon the grass that grew thick and soft along the edge. He touched the surface lightly with his fingertips, and a ripple spread outward, gentle and circular, disturbing the perfect reflection. The knight watched as the ripple widened, then slowed, until once again the lake returned to stillness. It felt as though the water had simply absorbed the disturbance, forgiving it, and returned to its eternal calm. He sat there for a long while, cloak gathered around him, eyes fixed upon the glassy expanse. The longer he gazed, the more it seemed that the lake reflected not only the sky above, but also the quiet landscape of his own heart. For years, his soul had been troubled, restless, searching, burdened by paths that never seemed to lead to peace. Now, looking into the water, he saw something else. The reflection of a man who no longer sought to fight the current, but instead to sit by it, breathing in its stillness. Time drifted gently forward. The mist lifted slowly, unveiling more of the lake's beauty. Along the opposite shore, tall reeds swayed lightly, their green tips bowing toward the water. Water lilies floated near Selim's side, their white blossoms unfolding with the morning light. The air smelled faintly of fresh rain, though no cloud lingered above. He rose from the shore and began to walk along the edge of the lake. Each step brought new sights, stones polished smooth by time, birds gliding low across the surface, dragonflies shimmering like fragments of glass caught in the sun. The knight walked slowly, as if unwilling to miss a single detail, for each was a thread in the tapestry of this moment. Halfway around the lake, he found a small wooden dock extending a short distance over the water. Its planks were weathered and silvered with age, yet sturdy, as though tended by hands long gone but never forgotten. Selim stepped onto it, the wood creaking softly beneath his weight. He stood at the edge, gazing outward, surrounded by silence so deep that it felt almost sacred. The lake stretched endlessly before him, a perfect mirror to the sky now painted in soft blues and pale golds. Clouds drifted lazily, mirrored upon the surface so clearly that it seemed he could step across the water into another world. He sat upon the dock, legs hanging freely, boots brushing lightly against the air above the water. For a long while, he did nothing but breathe, listening to the silence, which was not empty but alive, filled with the hum of unseen life, with the whispers of the breeze, with the pulse of the earth beneath the dock's wooden beams. At length, Selim closed his eyes. The silence around him folded inward, and he felt himself sink into it. No memory of battle, no weight of duty, no shadow of fear remained. There was only the gentle rhythm of his breath and the eternal stillness of the lake. He felt as though he could remain here forever, part of this quiet eternity. When he opened his eyes again, the sun had risen higher, spilling silver light across the water. The mist had almost fully vanished, leaving the lake so clear that the depths themselves seemed to glow. Selim leaned forward slightly, watching as fish swam in slow arcs beneath the surface, their movements graceful, untroubled. A heron stood upon the far bank, unmoving, its tall form blending with the reeds. Even the creatures of the lake seemed to honor its silence, their lives woven seamlessly into the stillness. For a moment, Selim thought of Eldoria itself, the castle, the fields, the people who lived quietly within its borders. Chapter 9. The Moon's Blessing. The night that descended upon Eldoria was unlike any other. It was neither restless nor ordinary. It was a night that seemed to have been spun from silver itself, woven with threads of quiet serenity and calm. The Moonlit Castle stood tall beneath the vast sky, its towers bathed in a soft glow that shimmered like liquid pearl. A veil of mist curled lazily across the hills, rising and falling as though the earth itself were breathing in its sleep. From the highest balcony of the castle, Sir Selim gazed across the kingdom. The air was still, save for the occasional whisper of wind weaving through the branches of the ancient oaks that lined the outer walls. The stars above sparkled gently, their glow softened by the full moon that reigned supreme. Its light fell upon the rivers, turning them into ribbons of molten silver that wound their way through the land. Every blade of grass, every leaf, every stone seemed touched by its blessing. Sir Selim leaned against the carved stone balustrade, his armor long set aside, replaced by robes of soft wool. The silence that stretched before him was not empty. It was alive with quiet wonders. He could hear the faint rustle of owls gliding through the night, the murmur of streams in the valleys below, and the sigh of the breeze that carried with it the fragrance of night-blooming jasmine. The knight closed his eyes for a moment, letting the cool breath of the evening settle upon his skin. For so long, his heart had been a restless traveler, wandering in search of meaning. Yet here, in this tranquil stillness, he felt the answer he had been seeking. Peace was not something to be found in distant lands or won in battles. It was already here, in the gentle embrace of the world around him. Within the great hall, the hearth was alight, casting a golden warmth across the chamber. A circle of villagers, nobles, and wandering minstrels sat together, sharing soft words and quiet laughter. No grand feast, no clamor, just the simple joy of togetherness. Lutes strummed softly, flutes sang in low, soothing tones, and the occasional voice lifted in song, weaving old ballads that carried through the stillness like a lullaby. Children lay curled beside their parents near the fire, their eyes heavy with dreams, while the elder of the village spoke of legends as ancient as the stars. He told of a time when the first stones of Eldoria's castle were laid under the light of a moon just as bright as tonight's. He spoke of how the heavens themselves had blessed the land, promising protection so long as its people lived in harmony with one another and with the earth. Sir Selim listened quietly, his heart swelling with a warmth that words could not name. The faces around him glowed softly in the firelight, each one calm, safe, and content. He found himself marveling not at their stories, but at the silence between the words, the pauses filled with nothing but the gentle crackle of the fire and the sound of steady, peaceful breathing. When the gathering had ended and the last lanterns were dimmed, Sir Selim walked slowly toward the castle's outer gardens. The air was cooler now, carrying with it the scent of fresh dew as it began to settle across the grass. Above him, the moon seemed closer than ever, a guardian suspended in the heavens. Its light painted every stone of the courtyard, every archway, every flower in shades of silver and pearl. The gardens themselves were hushed but alive with beauty. Roses bowed their heads beneath the moonlight, their petals soft and glowing. The lavender swayed gently as if keeping time with an unseen song, and the fountains that stood at the garden's heart spilled their waters in endless, soothing rhythm. As the hours passed and the kingdom drifted into slumber, Sir Selim lingered beneath the moon's glow, content to simply be. The night wrapped around him like a tender lullaby, each star a note, each breeze a sigh. And when he finally turned back toward the castle, its towers bathed in silver light, he carried with him the certainty that the blessing of this night, the moon's blessing, would never fade. For peace once found never truly leaves. It simply waits, like the moon in the sky, to be noticed once more. Crescent moon, and so the silent night stood beneath the heavens, embraced by stillness, the kingdom of Eldoria resting in perfect harmony. The story paused here, waiting for the soft turn of another page, another night, another chapter. Chapter 10, Eternal Stillness. The dawn came not with haste, but with a gentleness that felt almost shy, as though the sky itself wished to bow in reverence to the night that had just passed. A soft glow unfolded slowly over the horizon, brushing strokes of lavender, blush, and pale gold across the quiet heavens. The moonlit castle of Eldoria still shimmered faintly, as though its stones had captured fragments of moonlight and were reluctant to let them go. The glow upon the battlements was both silver and gold, night and morning coexisting in one fragile moment. From the balcony high above the castle's sleeping halls, Sir Selim stood in stillness. He leaned lightly upon the cold stone railing, his gaze turned toward the slow retreat of the stars. They dimmed one by one, like candles being gently blown out, yet each seemed to whisper a farewell, leaving behind trails of invisible memory. Selim's breath rose in soft clouds against the cool air, steady and calm. It was a breath not of longing nor of readiness, but of peace. The knight who had wandered for years, who had searched for meaning in silence and solitude, now stood entirely at rest. Below, in the small village that curled at the foot of the castle hill, the world began to stir. Wisps of smoke lifted lazily from chimneys, their gray tendrils curling upward before dissolving into the soft light. The faint ringing of a chapel bell drifted on the air, not sharp, but low and soothing, like a lullaby played for the morning. Doors creaked open as villagers stepped into the dewy grass, the elders stretching arms long stiff with sleep, the young skipping lightly into the fields to chase the first touches of light. A dog barked once, not urgently but joyfully, and the sound melted into the laughter of children chasing shadows that fled with the rising sun. Even these simple sounds felt woven with serenity, as though life itself had agreed to speak softly. Nothing hurried, nothing demanded. The rhythm of the village mirrored the slow, steady rhythm of the earth's turning. Selim watched all this from his perch above, and a warmth swelled in his chest. The villagers did not know him as a conqueror or a savior. They knew only the calm presence of the knight who dwelt within the castle. That was enough. To see them safe, to hear their laughter carried on the morning breeze. This was the only victory he desired. When the sun's rim had risen a little higher, painting the sky in fuller shades of pink and gold, Selim descended into the castle's gardens. The air was cool, laced with the fresh scent of roses and the sparkling purity of dew. The fountains that dotted the pathways spilled their streams with unbroken rhythm, the water catching the sunlight and scattering it like shattered jewels across the marble. He walked slowly, his armored boots making the softest of echoes against the stone paths. His hand brushed against blooming roses as he passed, the petals cool and velvety against his skin. Each flower, each blade of grass, seemed alive in its own quiet dignity, as though they too recognized the sacredness of this dawn. At the center of the gardens stood the ancient oak, its branches stretching wide, sheltering both sky and earth beneath its canopy. Birds stirred among its leaves, their wings whispering as they shook off sleep. The first notes of song soon followed, timid but sure, as though the oak had given them permission to sing the day awake. Selim paused beneath its shade. He tilted his head back, letting the light spill through the gaps between leaves, golden patterns flickering across his weathered face. For a moment, time felt suspended. Only the breath of wind, the sound of water, and the faint song of waking birds remained. "Eldoria is safe," he whispered, the words carried away on the breeze. "And so am I." The words were simple, yet they carried the full weight of his life. Once, silence had been his burden, an emptiness he could not bear. Now, silence was his companion, his teacher, his gift. He lingered there until the sun had climbed higher, then turned and returned slowly to the tower. Each step up the spiral staircase echoed gently, not hollow but resonant, as if even the stones themselves remembered his journey and blessed it with their quiet song. At the top, the view stretched wide and endless. Rivers glimmered like threads of glass, weaving between the folds of the land. Forests stood deep and ancient, their green crowns glowing in the morning's embrace. Beyond them, mountains rose, their peaks softened by mist, dissolving into the sky. Once, Selim might have longed to follow those rivers, to lose himself among those forests, to climb those distant mountains in search of something unnamed. But now he did not ache for what lay beyond. The horizon no longer tempted him. His heart was still. The wind rose, carrying the sense of earth and bloom, carrying also the faint sounds of village life, the steady strike of a hammer upon wood, the soft laughter of women gathering herbs, the clear call of a shepherd guiding his flock. The world below lived, and Selim, standing above, was part of it in stillness. He leaned into the wind and closed his eyes. It felt not like air but like an embrace, wrapping him in something greater than himself. He smiled, not the smile of victory, nor of relief, but the quiet smile of one who had come home, not to a place, but to his own heart. As the hours unfolded, the castle filled with the gentle movements of daily life. Servants lit fires in the kitchens, their warmth drifting up through the halls. The sound of wooden wheels rolled across the courtyards, bringing flour, fruit, and cloth from the village. Laughter echoed faintly from the stables where young squires tended to the horses. And yet, through all of this, a calm rhythm held. Even in labor, there was no rush. Even in laughter, there was no clamor. The castle breathed as one great body, slow, steady, serene. Selim walked its halls as though he were part of that breath, his steps unhurried. He passed tapestries that depicted stars and moons, oceans and mountains, stories woven in thread, stories of the land he no longer needed to chase. Each corridor, each stone, whispered to him, "You are home." By afternoon, the night returned once more to the gardens. The roses now basked fully in sunlight, their petals glowing as though lit from within. The fountains sparkled brighter, and the oak's shade offered cool respite. Selim sat beneath it, his back resting against the trunk. He closed his eyes, listening to the water, the birds, the gentle hum of bees among the blooms. It was a symphony, yet a symphony played in whispers. He thought of the countless nights he had wandered in silence, the weight of loneliness pressing upon him. He thought of battles endured in distant lands, of voices that had fallen into memory. He thought of his journey to Eldoria, uncertain, restless, searching. And then he thought of this moment here, beneath the oak, in a garden warmed by the sun. The silence was no longer emptiness. It was full of life, full of meaning, full of peace. As the sun dipped lower toward evening, the villagers once again filled the fields with their songs. Fires were lit in hearths, and the scent of bread drifted across the air. The laughter of children rose again, echoing up the hill toward the castle. Selim remained where he sat, allowing it all to wash over him. The world was alive, and he was alive within it, held not by duty, not by burden, but by the gentle embrace of peace. The light softened, shadows stretched, the sky turned once more toward hues of lavender and rose. The first star appeared, timid yet bright, above the crest of the mountains. And as night prepared to descend, Sir Selim knew his journey had ended exactly as it was meant to. Not in noise, not in conquest, but in harmony. The moonlit castle would endure, its stones glowing by moon and sun alike. Generations would walk its halls, laughter would fill its courtyards, music would rise from its chambers. Villagers would live their lives, children would grow, and each night would come softly, as it always had. And through it all, one truth would remain eternal. Within stillness, there is strength. Within silence, there is song. And within peace, there is the greatest treasure of all. When the final glow of twilight crowned the towers in silver and gold, Selim closed his eyes. His spirit rested not upon the road, not upon the battlefield, but upon the quiet soil of Eldoria. The story of the silent night ended not with an ending, but with a continuation of stillness, forever woven into the air, the stones, and the stars above. And so, under the eternal watch of sky and moon, Sir Selim rested guardian of silence, keeper of peace, forever part of the moonlit castle of Eldoria. Crescent Moon, the End.